The morning started like any other Tuesday in the Mitchell household. Sarah had woken up early, as she always did, to the gentle sounds of her husband David snoring softly beside her. Sunlight filtered through the bedroom curtains, casting warm golden streaks across the hardwood floor. She could hear Emma downstairs in the kitchen with their babysitter, Lisa, probably negotiating for extra pancakes with chocolate chips. Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion. She'd been up late finishing a project for work, and the familiar sounds of her daughter's negotiation tactics never failed to bring her joy. Emma was 3 years and 7 months old. She had inherited her mother's curly hair and her father's bright blue eyes. She was the kind of child who lit up a room with her presence, her laughter infectious and genuine. Just yesterday, Emma had spent the entire afternoon building an elaborate fort in the living room using every pillow and blanket in the house. Sarah had watched her daughter's imagination at work, marveling at the intricate details Emma had created. A window for watching for dragons, a secret back exit for emergency escapes, and a throne made entirely of throw pillows where she ruled her imaginary kingdom. That morning something felt different. Emma had complained of not feeling well when Sarah arrived at the kitchen. Her small forehead was warm, not burning hot, just slightly elevated. Sarah had noticed it immediately, a mother's instinct, that sixth sense that something wasn't quite right, but Emma wanted to go to her preschool. She insisted on it, her little voice determined and stubborn. "Mommy, we're making butterfly wings today in art class. I can't miss butterflies." Sarah had taken her temperature, 99.8 degrees. It was barely a fever. She decided to send Emma to school, planning to pick her up early. By noon, the school called. Emma had developed a more pronounced fever and seemed unusually lethargic. She was lying on a cot in the nurse's office, her usual vibrant energy completely depleted. Sarah's stomach twisted with worry. She'd left work immediately, breaking several traffic laws in the process. When she arrived at the school, Emma looked so small curled up on that narrow cot. Sarah scooped her daughter into her arms, and Emma had buried her face in her mother's shoulder without saying a word. The pediatrician's office was packed with sick children and anxious parents. Sarah sat in the waiting room. Emma nestled against her chest and tried to calm her racing thoughts. It was probably just a virus. Kids got viruses all the time. Emma would take some acetaminophen, rest for a few days, and be back to her normal chaotic self by the weekend. That's what Sarah kept telling herself. That's what every mother in that waiting room was probably telling themselves. Doctor had been Emma's pediatrician since birth. He was a kind man in his 60s, with gentle hands and an even gentler demeanor. He checked Emma over thoroughly during the examination, asking questions, listening to her heart and lungs, palpating her abdomen. Sarah watched his face carefully, looking for reassurance. But as he continued the examination, his expression became more serious, more contemplative. "I'm going to order some blood work," Doctor had said carefully. "It's probably nothing, but I want to be thorough. Emma's spleen is slightly enlarged, and combined with this fever and lethargy, I'd like to rule out a few things." His words should have been reassuring, but Sarah heard the hesitation in his voice. A mother knows. She always knows. The blood draw was traumatic. Emma screamed as the phlebotomist searched for a vein, her tiny fists clenched. Sarah held her daughter's hand, whispering reassurances she didn't entirely believe herself. "It's okay, baby, just one little poke. You're so brave, so incredibly brave." The words felt hollow even as she spoke them. They went home and Emma slept fitfully for hours. Sarah sat beside her bed, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall, searching for peace that wouldn't come. She'd called David at work. "The doctor ordered blood work. It's probably nothing. Don't worry." But her voice had betrayed her, trembling slightly on the last word. At 6:47 p.m., Doctor called. "Sarah, I need you to bring Emma to Children's Hospital immediately. Don't wait. I've already contacted them. Her blood work shows abnormalities that require urgent evaluation. I don't want to alarm you, but we need to move quickly." Sarah's world had stopped. Abnormalities, urgent, Children's Hospital. The words didn't make sense. They belonged to other families, not to her, not to Emma, not to the little girl who'd been singing Let It Go off-key just 2 days ago while dancing in the living room. The drive to Children's Hospital was a blur of red traffic lights and David's white knuckles gripping the steering wheel. Emma slept in her car seat, oblivious to the growing dread that was suffocating her parents. Sarah had reached back and held her daughter's small hand, pressing it gently against her own palm. The hospital's pediatric oncology department was a shock. Sarah noticed things she would normally have missed: the cheerful murals on the walls trying desperately to distract from the reality of illness, the bald children in wheelchairs being pushed by worried parents, the pervasive smell of antiseptic that couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of fear and hope mingled together. They'd been taken to an examination room. A team of specialists arrived, the pediatric oncologist Dr. Reeves along with nurses and residents. More tests, more blood draws. Emma had cried and Sarah's heart had broken with each tear. The waiting afterward was interminable. Sarah and David sat in the hallway outside Emma's room, barely speaking, barely breathing. Then Dr. Reeves had emerged, her expression grave and compassionate. "I'm so sorry to tell you this," she began, and Sarah had known immediately that her life was about to change forever. "Emma has acute lymphoblastic leukemia. It's a type of blood cancer, and she will need aggressive chemotherapy beginning immediately." Sarah had heard the rest through a fog: statistics, survival rates, treatment protocols. The words were clinical, medical, surreal. Around them, other families moved through the hospital with the same expressions: parents clutching their children, children with bald heads and hollow eyes. This was their world now, Sarah realized. This sterile, fluorescent-lit world of hospitals and treatments and uncertainties. In the hallway outside Emma's hospital room, Sarah's hands had trembled as she held her daughter's tiny fingers. Emma looked up at her with confusion in her bright blue eyes. "Mommy, when can I go home?" That simple question had shattered Sarah completely. How could she explain that their home, their normal life had vanished? That the next several years would be consumed by treatments and pain, and the terrifying unknown 3 months. That's how long Emma had been fighting. 3 months of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and watching her daughter gradually disappear before her eyes. The curly hair that Sarah had spent years carefully styling, it was gone now, lost in clumps to the bathroom tile during the second week of treatment. Emma had watched it fall without crying. Sarah had cried enough for both of them. The chemotherapy ward of Children's Hospital had become Sarah's second home. She could navigate it blindfolded at this point, knew which nurses had gentle hands, which ones were efficient but could accidentally hurt, and which ones always brought extra popsicles for the children between treatments. She knew the smell of the antiseptic spray they used on the IV ports, the cold sensation of the metal chair that she sat in during every treatment, and the particular shade of blue the walls were painted. A shade that was supposed to be calming, but only made everything feel more clinically depressing. Emma was in a lot of pain. The oncologists explained that this was normal, expected even. The chemotherapy drugs were designed to kill cancer cells, but they didn't discriminate. They destroyed healthy cells too. Emma's mouth had developed painful sores that made eating impossible. She'd lost 15 pounds from her already tiny frame. Her immune system was so compromised that the family had to wear masks around her. Even a common cold could be life-threatening to a child in her condition. The nausea was perhaps the worst part. Day after day, Emma would vomit violently. Anti-nausea medications helped somewhat, but nothing could completely prevent it. Sarah would hold her daughter's frail body over the toilet, rubbing her bald head gently, whispering, "You're okay, baby, I'm right here. You're so brave." But Emma would only look at her with eyes that seemed far too old for a 3-year-old, eyes that had seen too much suffering. What broke Sarah's heart the most was Emma's personality shift. The vibrant, imaginative, laughing child who built forts and sang off-key was disappearing. In her place was a quiet, withdrawn shell of a girl. Emma spent most days lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. She'd stopped asking to go home. She'd stopped drawing pictures. She'd stopped singing. She wouldn't even watch her favorite Disney movies anymore. She just existed, enduring treatment after treatment, day after day. David was struggling too. Sarah could see it in the way he moved through the hospital, mechanically, robotically, as if his body was running on empty. He'd missed work so often that his company had eventually put him on an unpaid leave. Money was becoming a problem, but neither parent could focus on it. Emma's life was the only thing that mattered. They'd emptied their savings account without hesitation. They'd taken out loans. They would have sold everything they owned if it meant saving their daughter's life. One night, around midnight, Sarah found herself sitting in the hospital's family lounge, staring blankly at her laptop. She'd been scrolling through her email, not really reading anything, just needing to feel connected to some part of her normal life. A message popped up from a friend she hadn't talked to in years, someone she'd gone to college with. It contained an article about animal-assisted therapy. Sarah almost deleted it. She wasn't in the mood for inspirational content, but something made her click the link instead. The article was about dogs, specifically therapy dogs that visited hospitals and helped patients, particularly children with serious illnesses. There were testimonials from parents whose children had endured chemotherapy just like Emma. They talked about how their children had become withdrawn and depressed, much like Emma. But after visits from therapy dogs, something had shifted. The children had smiled again. They'd laughed. They'd found little moments of joy in the midst of their suffering. Sarah's hands had shaken as she read. Could this be possible? Could a dog actually help her daughter find some measure of peace during this nightmare? It seemed almost too good to be true. She'd read more, diving deeper into research. Study after study showed that dogs had a remarkable ability to sense emotional distress and respond with comfort. They didn't judge. They didn't try to fix things with words. They simply offered their presence, their loyalty, their unconditional love. By 2 a.m., Sarah had found information about a community event happening that coming Saturday at Riverside Park. Police K-9 units would be there. Dogs trained by law enforcement. Strong, brave dogs. Sarah had felt something stir inside her, a fragile seed of hope. Maybe this could help Emma. Maybe seeing a powerful, protective dog could help her daughter feel a little braver, a little less alone in her struggle. When she'd finally gone to bed, David was already asleep. She'd laid beside him, her mind racing with possibilities. What if this didn't work? What if it made Emma feel worse? But then she thought about her daughter lying in that hospital bed, staring at nothing. What did they have to lose? They were already living in their worst nightmare. The next morning, Sarah had approached David carefully. He was drinking coffee in the hospital cafeteria, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "I found something I want to try," she'd said, and she'd shown him the article. She'd watched his face as he read, seeing the same desperate hope bloom in his eyes that had bloomed in hers. "A therapy dog?" he'd asked cautiously. Not exactly therapy dogs, police dogs, but apparently dogs have this incredible ability to sense when people are suffering. They can help people feel braver, less afraid. Sarah's voice had been trembling with barely contained emotion. "I know it sounds crazy. I know there's no guarantee it will work, but Emma is disappearing, David. We're losing her. Not to the cancer, to the fear and depression that comes with it. We have to try something." David had set down his coffee cup. He'd reached across the table and taken Sarah's hand. "When is this event?" "Saturday, at Riverside Park." "Then we'll be there," he'd said firmly. "We'll take Emma. We'll do whatever it takes." For the first time in 3 months, Sarah had felt the tiniest glimmer of hope. Maybe it wouldn't work. Maybe Saturday would be just another disappointing day. But maybe, just maybe, a brave, four-legged guardian could help her daughter find the courage to keep fighting. As she'd looked at her husband across that cafeteria table, she'd made another silent promise. She would pursue every possible avenue, explore every option, cling to every thread of hope, no matter how unlikely, if it meant saving her daughter's life and soul. Saturday couldn't come soon enough. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather. the kind of autumn day that seemed almost cruel in its beauty. The sun was warm but not hot. There was a gentle breeze that rustled through the trees lining Riverside Park, and the sky was an unblemished blue. Sarah stood in Emma's hospital room, looking at her daughter with a mixture of hope and apprehension. They'd been given permission to leave the hospital for a few hours, which was unusual. Dr. Reeves understood that sometimes the soul needs healing as much as the body does. Emma was having a relatively good day. The nausea was minimal and her energy levels were slightly elevated, but she was still so fragile, so small and bald and withdrawn. Sarah had dressed her in Emma's favorite pink dress, the one with white sneakers that Emma had worn 100 times before her illness. Seeing her daughter in it now felt bittersweet. The dress hung loosely on Emma's frame, where it used to fit snugly. Her skinny legs seemed almost translucent under the fabric. "We're going to see a police dog today, remember," Sarah said gently, helping Emma into the wheelchair. The hospital had provided it to conserve Emma's limited energy. A big, strong dog named Duke. Emma didn't respond. She rarely did anymore. But Sarah noticed something, a slight tilt of her daughter's head, a minimal shift in her expression. Maybe she was listening. Maybe some part of Emma was still in there, buried beneath the trauma and pain. David drove carefully, taking corners slowly to avoid jostling Emma. Sarah sat in the back seat beside their daughter, holding her hand. Emma's fingers were cold and thin, fragile as bird bones. They drove in silence, the radio playing softly in the background. Sarah kept replaying the article about therapy dogs in her mind. What if nothing happened? What if they'd brought Emma all this way only to have her disappointment added to her already unbearable burden? What if this made things worse? But David had squeezed her hand before they left the house, a silent message. "We're doing the right thing. Have faith." Riverside Park was bustling with activity. There were booths set up with balloons and information about community safety. A banner stretched across the entrance. "Community Safety Day. Meet your local police K-9 units." Families were everywhere, parents with children, young couples, elderly residents. It was a snapshot of normal American life, of a world that hadn't stopped spinning even though Sarah's world had come to a standstill 3 months ago. David pushed Emma's wheelchair slowly along the park's main path. Sarah kept looking for the police dogs, her heart rate accelerating with nervous anticipation. And then she saw them, 3 uniformed officers with 3 German shepherds. The dogs were magnificent, powerful and alert, but also well-trained and calm. One of them stood out immediately. He was slightly larger than the others, with darker coloring and the most intelligent expression on his face. His handler was a young Asian-American officer with kind eyes and a warm smile. "That must be Duke," Sarah whispered to David. They moved closer, joining the informal gathering of families waiting for their turn to interact with the dogs. Other children were excitedly talking about petting the dogs, asking their parents questions, bouncing with the kind of innocent enthusiasm that reminded Sarah painfully of how Emma used to be. Emma sat silently in her wheelchair, not reaching out, not expressing interest, just watching. Officer Duke's handler was talking to a family about police dog training. His voice was warm and engaging, and he clearly loved his job. He was just wrapping up with one family when he noticed the Mitchell family. His expression shifted slightly when he saw Emma. Sarah recognized it as the look people got when they realized something was different, something was wrong. But to his credit, didn't let pity show. Instead, he approached with a genuine smile. "Hello there," said, kneeling down to be at eye level with Emma. "My name is Officer and this is my partner Duke. Would you like to meet him?" For a long moment, Emma didn't respond. She just stared at with those large blue eyes that seemed to see far more than a 3-year-old should see. Sarah's hope began to falter. This was a mistake. Emma was too far gone, too withdrawn. A dog wasn't going to. But then Emma moved. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out one thin arm, stood and gently positioned Duke so the dog was at Emma's level. The German shepherd's tail wagged in a friendly manner. This was routine for Duke. He'd done this countless times. And then something extraordinary happened. Duke's wagging tail slowed. He stopped moving entirely, his entire muscular body going rigid with focus. His brown eyes locked directly on Emma's blue ones with an intensity that made the hair on Sarah's arm stand on end. Slowly, as if he understood exactly what was needed, Duke lowered his massive head until it was level with Emma's small face. Emma's hand moved upward and made contact with Duke's fur. The moment her skin touched his coat, Emma began to cry. Not loud, dramatic tears, but silent tears that rolled down her cheeks as she stared directly into the dog's eyes. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. David's hand found hers. Around them, the casual chatter of the park seemed to fade away. People began to notice. A woman nearby nudged her companion and pointed. A grandfather stopped talking to his grandchild. The other police officers with their dogs seemed to recognize that something significant was occurring. Emma's hand moved slowly across Duke's head, and Duke remained perfectly still, unwavering, completely focused on the little girl before him. There was no movement, no sound except the gentle rustle of the autumn breeze through the trees. To anyone watching, it appeared that two souls were communicating in a language no one else could understand. Sarah felt tears streaming down her own face. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she could feel it, something profound, something sacred, something that transcended the ordinary. It was as if Duke could see into Emma's very core, could perceive all the pain and fear and darkness that had accumulated over these 3 months, and he was standing there with her in it, offering his presence as a silent promise that she wasn't alone. Minutes passed. 5 minutes felt like hours. Emma continued to stroke Duke's head, tears flowing freely, while the dog remained motionless, a living embodiment of strength and compassion. The park around them seemed to hold its breath. Other children played and laughed, but the space around Emma and Duke had become a sanctuary, a moment suspended outside of time. Finally, Emma pulled her hand away. She turned to look at her mother, and for the first time in 3 months, Sarah saw something in her daughter's eyes, not quite happiness, but something close. A spark, a glimmer of hope, a tiny indication that despite everything, despite the pain and the suffering and the seemingly insurmountable battle ahead, Emma still had fight in her. "Mommy," Emma whispered so quietly that Sarah had to lean in to hear her. Duke knows I'm scared." Sarah's legs nearly buckled beneath her. David caught her, holding her steady as tears poured down both their faces. Something had just shifted. Something had changed. The mysterious connection between Emma and Duke had given Sarah's daughter exactly what she needed most, the knowledge that she wasn't facing this battle alone. Time seemed to stop in Riverside Park that Saturday morning. 5 minutes. That's how long Emma and Duke remained locked in their silent conversation, but those 5 minutes felt like an eternity of profound transformation. Sarah couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but watch as her daughter, her suffering, withdrawn, broken daughter, communicated with this powerful dog in a language that existed beyond words. Emma's hand continued its gentle motion across Duke's head, her small fingers occasionally stroking his ears or running along the contours of his face. The tears that rolled down her cheeks weren't tears of pain, Sarah realized. They were tears of recognition, of release, of finally being truly seen and understood by another living being. Sarah had spent 3 months trying to comfort her daughter, trying to ease her suffering with words and cuddles and reassurances, but nothing had worked. How could it? How could any parent adequately comfort a child facing cancer? Yet Duke was doing it, not with words or explanations or false promises, simply with his presence, simply with his willingness to stand completely still, to meet Emma's gaze without flinching, to offer his strength as a silent anchor in the midst of her storm. Sarah became aware of movement around them. The casual park atmosphere had shifted. The ambient noise of families playing and laughing had diminished. People were noticing. A mother nearby had stopped mid-conversation, her hand frozen on her child's shoulder. An elderly man had paused in his walk, his eyes fixed on Emma and Duke. The other police officers stood quietly, recognizing that something beyond their training manuals was occurring. His expression was one of complete shock and wonder. In his 5 years working with Duke, the officer had witnessed many beautiful interactions between his canine partner and the public, but he had never, not once, witnessed anything remotely close to this. Duke was a professional. He was well-trained, calm, and friendly, but he maintained appropriate boundaries. He didn't typically position himself in this way, didn't typically offer this level of undivided attention. It was as if the dog knew, on some fundamental level, that this small, bald girl before him carried within her a weight that would have crushed many adults. Sarah felt David's arm slip around her waist, pulling her close. His breathing was ragged, and she could feel his heart pounding as rapidly as her own. They were witnessing something miraculous, something that would be impossible to explain to anyone else. How could they possibly convey this to someone who hadn't seen it? How could they describe the energy, the electricity, the palpable sense of two souls recognizing each other across the vast distance of different species and different experiences? In those 5 minutes, Emma didn't speak. She didn't smile outwardly. She didn't do anything dramatic or performative. She simply cried, her tears flowing freely as her hand moved across Duke's fur. But within those tears, Sarah could sense something fundamental shifting in her daughter. The wall that Emma had built around herself, the wall of fear and pain and resignation, was developing cracks. Light was beginning to seep through. A young couple standing nearby were holding each other, both openly weeping. The grandfather who had stopped his walk was standing with his hand over his heart, his weathered face crumpled with emotion. A park employee had actually stopped pushing his maintenance cart to watch. Dozens of people were now aware that something extraordinary was transpiring, even if they didn't fully understand it. Sarah's mind was spinning. She thought about all the medical appointments, all the specialists, all the expensive treatments and medications and procedures. She thought about how David had missed weeks of work, how they'd gone into debt, how they'd sacrificed everything. And in one moment, this single, crystalline moment, a police dog had accomplished what all of modern medicine couldn't. He had given Emma hope. He had shown her that she wasn't alone. Then finally, Emma pulled her hand away from Duke's head. The dog's eyes remained locked on hers for another moment before he slowly pulled back into a more natural sitting position. Emma turned to face her mother, and Sarah gasped. The change in her daughter's face was subtle but undeniable. The hollow, haunted expression had shifted. There was something in Emma's eyes that hadn't been there before, a light, a presence, a spark of the girl she used to be. "Mommy," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible but crystal clear. Duke knows I'm scared." Sarah's knees buckled. David caught her, his strong arms the only thing keeping her upright. Those 8 simple words, spoken by her daughter for the first time in weeks, undid something fundamental within Sarah. The floodgates opened. Tears poured down her face as she made her way to Emma's wheelchair and knelt beside it, pulling her daughter into an embrace. "I know, baby, I know," she whispered into Emma's bald head, her voice breaking with the weight of 3 months of accumulated grief and fear and desperate love. "I know you're scared, we all know, and it's okay to be scared." Emma's small arms wrapped around her mother's neck, and for the first time since her diagnosis, Emma held on. She didn't just passively accept comfort, she actively sought it, actively clung to her mother. David joined them, wrapping his arms around both his wife and daughter, and the 3 of them held each other in the middle of Riverside Park while tears flowed freely. Around them, people were openly crying now. The park had become a sanctuary of shared human emotion. The mother nearby was wiping her eyes. The elderly grandfather was openly sobbing. Even the park employee had abandoned his maintenance duties, standing with tears streaming down his face. This moment, this inexplicable, beautiful, transcendent moment, had touched something deep within the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. Stood frozen, his professional composure completely shattered. He'd had no idea this would happen. He'd simply been doing his job, offering his trained police dog to the community at a routine safety event. He couldn't have predicted that Duke would somehow reach across the vast chasm of Emma's suffering and offer her exactly what she needed. The knowledge that someone, something, understood her pain and would stand beside her through it. After several minutes, Sarah pulled back slightly, her face wet with tears. She looked at Emma, really looked at her, and saw her daughter looking back. There was still pain there, still fear, still the weight of the battle ahead. But there was also something new, a fragile but growing determination, a tiny seed of hope that had just been planted by 4 powerful paws and a loyal heart. "Thank you," Emma whispered again, this time looking directly at Duke. The dog's tail wagged slowly, as if he understood that he had just changed everything. Officer's mind was still reeling as he watched Emma's family hold each other on the park bench. In all his years as a police officer and K-9 handler, he had never witnessed anything like what had just occurred. His training had taught him to observe, to analyze, to remain professional in all circumstances. But professionalism seemed irrelevant now. What he'd witnessed transcended the boundaries of his job description. He made a decision. Leaving his patrol partner with a fellow officer, approached the Mitchell family slowly, giving them space and time to regain their composure. Sarah was the first to notice him, wiping her tears with the back of her hand as she looked up. Her eyes were red, puffy, devastated, yet somehow also filled with a fragile hope that hadn't been there minutes ago. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," began, his voice gentle and sincere. "I know you need your family time, but I've never seen Duke respond like that to anyone, not in 5 years. I need to understand what just happened. May I ask, is there something special about Emma?" Sarah and David exchanged a glance. It was the kind of look that exists only between parents who have suffered together, who have walked through the valley of the shadow of death together. Sarah took a shaky breath. David reached over and squeezed her hand. "Come sit with us," Sarah said quietly, gesturing to the empty space on the bench. Sat down, Duke remaining at his side, strangely calm and attentive to every word that would follow. Sarah began to speak, her voice trembling as she recounted Emma's diagnosis, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. She explained how 3 months ago they'd been a normal family living a normal life, and then everything had changed in the span of a doctor's appointment. As Sarah talked, felt his chest tightening. She described Emma's first chemotherapy session, how the little girl had screamed as the IV was inserted. She talked about the hair loss, the vomiting, the bone-deep exhaustion. Her voice cracked when she mentioned how Emma had stopped smiling, stopped playing, stopped being Emma. "The treatments are working," David added, his voice rough with emotion. "The doctors say the cancer is responding, but my daughter, she's disappearing. The physical battle is hard enough, but watching her lose her spirit, her will to fight, that's what's been breaking us." Found himself unable to speak. He looked at Emma, this small, bald child who was watching him with those impossibly old blue eyes. 3 years old. She should be worried about preschool friendships and cartoon characters, and whether she could have extra cookies. Instead, she was waging a war against a disease that would have devastated most adults. "We came to this event because I read about therapy dogs," Sarah continued. "Studies show they can help children with serious illnesses feel less afraid, less alone. We didn't expect." She gestured vaguely toward where Emma and Duke had connected. "This, whatever this was." Looked at Duke, seeing his partner in a new light. The dog sat beside him with an unusual stillness, as if he too understood the weight of what had been shared. An idea began to form in his mind, something that felt important, something that felt necessary. "I need to tell you something about Duke," said slowly. "Before he was my police partner, he was a rescue dog. He was found abandoned in a vacant building when he was just a puppy, maybe 6 weeks old. He was malnourished, terrified, and covered in infections. The shelter said he was unlikely to survive. They recommended euthanasia." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "But one of the shelter volunteers saw something in him," continued, potential, courage, and will to survive despite impossible odds. She nursed him back to health. It took months, but Duke fought. He fought through the pain, the fear, the uncertainty. He didn't know if he'd make it, but he fought anyway. And he survived. He thrived. Eventually, he was selected for police dog training, and now he serves his community every single day. Paused, letting his words sink in. He could see David's eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I think Duke recognized something in Emma," said quietly. "I think he saw a fellow warrior, a young fighter facing unimaginable odds just like he once did, and I think he wanted her to know that she's not alone in this, that survival is possible, that even in the darkest moments there is hope." Sarah was openly crying now, but her tears seemed different, less desperate, more purposeful. "Do you really believe that?" she asked. "That Duke understands on that level?" "I've never believed it before," admitted. "But after what I just witnessed, yes, I believe that dogs have a capacity for empathy that we don't fully understand. I believe they can sense suffering and respond to it. And I believe that Duke is exactly the companion your daughter needs right now." David leaned forward, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Is there any way? Could Duke visit Emma during her treatment? She still has months of chemotherapy ahead. If she could see Duke, if she could spend time with him." Didn't hesitate. "Yes, absolutely yes. I don't know what all the logistics will be, but I will figure it out. I will make it happen. This little girl has touched something in my heart that I can't explain, and Duke clearly feels the same way." Emma, who had been listening quietly, suddenly reached out her small hand toward Duke. The dog immediately moved closer, and Emma's fingers found his head, stroking him gently. Felt emotion overwhelming him at the sight. "Emma," said softly, kneeling down to her level, "I'm going to make you a promise. Duke and I are going to be here for you, every step of your fight. We're going to help you be brave. We're going to remind you that you're not alone. Can you do that with us?" Emma looked at him with those ancient eyes, and then she nodded solemnly. "Duke is my friend," she said quietly. "Duke will help me win." The certainty in that small voice was unlike anything had ever heard. This wasn't a child playing pretend. This was a child who had just found something she desperately needed, an ally, a protector, a tangible symbol of survival and hope. Sarah took's phone number and gave him theirs. They made plans for visits. As stood to leave, Emma called out to him. "Officer," her voice was tiny but clear. "Yes, Emma." "Thank you for bringing Duke. Thank you for my best friend." Had to turn away, unable to control the tears streaming down his face. He walked back to his patrol car, Duke at his side, and sat in the driver's seat for several minutes just breathing. He pulled out his phone and called the hospital's administrative office. If Emma Mitchell was going to fight this battle, she was going to do it with a four-legged guardian at her side. Would make absolutely certain of it. He had no idea that this Saturday at Riverside Park would become the most significant day of his career. Not because of any police work, but because a small bald girl and a German shepherd had shown him the true meaning of courage, connection, and hope. The first official visit from Officer and Duke to Children's Hospital's oncology ward happened on a Tuesday morning, exactly 4 days after their meeting at Riverside Park. Emma had been awake since 5 a.m., her excitement palpable despite her weakened condition. She kept asking Sarah the same question over and over. Is it time for Duke yet? Is Duke coming? By 9 a.m., when arrived with Duke in the hospital's recreation room, a space that had been specially arranged for their visits, Emma was vibrating with an energy that Sarah hadn't seen in months. The little girl was sitting up in a hospital chair, wearing a colorful that Sarah had tied around her head to cover her baldness. She'd refused to wear it until today, but for Duke's visit, she wanted to look nice. The moment Duke entered the room, something shifted in the atmosphere. It was as if the dog brought with him a healing energy that permeated the sterile, antiseptic environment. Duke walked directly to Emma, and without any command gently placed his head in her lap. Emma's arms wrapped around the dog's neck, and she buried her face in his fur. "Hi, Duke," she whispered. "I've been waiting for you." Sarah watched from the doorway, tears streaming down her face. The change in her daughter over 4 days was remarkable. Emma was eating better. She complained less about nausea during her last chemotherapy session. And most importantly, she was smiling, genuinely smiling, not the forced smiles she'd manufactured for her parents' benefit. Sat down in a chair nearby, giving Emma and Duke space but remaining present. "How are you feeling today, Emma?" he asked gently. "Better," Emma said, stroking Duke's ears. "Duke makes me feel brave." Over the following weeks, the visits became a ritual. Every Tuesday and Friday morning would arrive with Duke. Emma looked forward to these visits with an intensity that was almost palpable. The rest of her week seemed to revolve around these appointments. On her difficult treatment days, when nausea and pain overwhelmed her, she would remind herself, "Duke's coming on Friday. I have to be strong for Duke." But something else began to happen that neither Sarah nor had anticipated. Other children in the oncology ward started to notice. They'd see Duke in the hallway and their eyes would light up. Soon, children were asking their parents if they could meet the police dog too. Parents began approaching, asking if their children could have visits with Duke. At first, the hospital administration was hesitant. There were concerns about hygiene, about allergies, about disrupting the established protocols of the ward. But Dr. Reeves, Emma's oncologist, became Duke's strongest advocate. She'd witnessed the transformation in Emma firsthand. The little girl was responding better to treatment. Her immune markers were improving, and most importantly, her psychological state had shifted from despair to determined hope. "This dog is doing more for these children than any medication I can prescribe," Dr. Reeves told the hospital board. "We're seeing improvements in pain management, in appetite, in emotional resilience. I want to expand the program." Within a month, had official approval to bring Duke to the oncology ward twice a week for group visits in the recreation room. The response was overwhelming. Children who hadn't smiled in months began to light up. Teenagers who had withdrawn into depression began to engage. Parents found themselves witnessing small miracles as their children's spirits lifted. Emma, however, seemed to have a special connection with Duke that transcended the other children's experiences. She became an unofficial ambassador, helping other children understand how to interact with the dog. She would sit beside younger children during visits, showing them how to stroke Duke's fur gently, how to look into his eyes without fear, how to share their worries with him. "Duke knows you're scared," Emma would tell them with the authority of someone who had discovered a profound truth. "Duke understands. He was scared too when he was little, but he survived, and so will you." Sarah was astounded by her daughter's transformation. Emma had become a healer herself, using her own survival story and her bond with Duke to give hope to other children facing the same battle. It was as if, by helping others, Emma was reinforcing her own determination to survive. One afternoon, a new patient arrived in the ward, a 6-year-old boy named Tyler who had just been diagnosed with leukemia. His mother was devastated, his father was in shock, and Tyler himself was terrified and angry. He refused to participate in the visiting hours when other families came by. He didn't want to see anyone or do anything except lie in bed and feel sorry for himself. Emma heard about Tyler and decided to take matters into her own hands. With Sarah's help, she maneuvered herself out of her room and into the hallway, barely able to walk, her IV pole rolling beside her. She made her way to Tyler's room. "My name is Emma," she said, standing in his doorway. "I have cancer too. I'm getting better and so will you. There's a dog coming tomorrow. His name is Duke. He's my best friend. You should meet him." Tyler stared at her, this tiny bald girl who looked like a skeleton, who was somehow still standing and talking despite obvious pain. "Why?" he asked. "Because Duke will help you be brave," Emma said simply, "like he helped me." The next day, Tyler attended the group visit. He was hesitant, resistant, but when Duke approached him, the same inexplicable connection that had occurred with Emma happened again. Tyler's walls began to crumble. By the end of the visit, he was crying, not from pain or fear, but from relief, from knowing he wasn't alone, from understanding that if this small girl could survive cancer, maybe he could too. Watched this unfold with amazement. He'd brought Duke to the hospital to help Emma, but Emma had become Duke's partner in this healing mission. Together, they were transforming the entire oncology ward from a place of despair into a sanctuary of hope. One evening, sat with Sarah in the hospital cafeteria while David watched Emma and Duke together through the recreation room window. "Your daughter is extraordinary," said quietly. Sarah nodded, her eyes reflecting the window. She found something to fight for beyond just survival. She's fighting to give other children hope. That's what's really healing her. The visits became legendary within the hospital. Nurses would mention them in their reports. Parents would talk about them in the waiting rooms. The hospital even began getting letters from former patients who had been treated years ago, asking if they could bring their own children to visit with Duke, wanting to share this healing experience with the next generation of young cancer fighters. 6 months into the visits, Emma's latest scan came back clear. There was no trace of cancer. Her remission was progressing beautifully. But Emma didn't celebrate just for herself. She celebrated for every child she'd helped inspire, every moment of hope she'd facilitated through her friendship with Duke. "Duke and I are going to keep helping kids," Emma announced to her mother with absolute certainty. "Even when I'm all better, we're going to keep visiting the hospital. There's so much more work to do." And in that moment, Sarah understood that her daughter hadn't just survived cancer. She had transformed it into purpose. She had taken her pain and transmuted it into healing for others. And a loyal German shepherd had been her companion every step of the way. 8 months after Emma first touched Duke's head at Riverside Park, the Mitchell family sat in Dr. Reeves' office waiting for the results of Emma's latest PET scan. Sarah's hands were trembling so severely that she had to clasp them together. David's jaw was clenched with tension. Emma sat between them, holding Duke's leash. The dog had been permitted to accompany them to this appointment, a testament to how integral he had become to Emma's medical team. Dr. Reeves entered the room with a smile that Sarah recognized immediately. This was the smile she'd been praying for, the smile that meant good news, the smile that meant her daughter was going to live. "Emma," Dr. Reeves said, kneeling down to the little girl's level, "you are officially in remission. There is no trace of leukemia anywhere in your body. You did it, sweetheart. You are a survivor." The room exploded into chaos. Sarah was sobbing, pulling her daughter into her arms. David was on his knees beside them, tears streaming down his face. Emma was laughing, actually laughing, a sound that seemed to fill the entire office with light. Duke's tail wagged with such vigor that he nearly knocked over a desk lamp. "We're celebrating," Emma announced with absolute certainty. "Duke and I are celebrating with everyone at the hospital." Within hours, word had spread through the oncology ward that Emma Mitchell was in remission. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Nurses came by her room to congratulate her. Doctors stopped in to share in her joy. But most importantly, the other children who had become part of the Duke program wanted to celebrate with her. The hospital's administration gave permission for a special celebration in the main recreation room. What had been planned as a small gathering quickly evolved into something much larger. News of Emma's remission had captured the attention of the local media. A reporter from the Portland Evening News arrived with a camera crew. The story of a young cancer survivor and her police dog companion was exactly the kind of heartwarming human interest piece that resonated with viewers. The celebration was scheduled for a Friday evening. Parents brought their children who were currently undergoing treatment. Siblings of patients attended. Hospital staff came in their off hours. Dr. Reeves was there, stood proudly beside Duke, watching as the dog moved through the crowd, offering comfort to every child who reached out to him. Emma wore a special dress for the occasion, not the pink one from the park, but a beautiful lavender dress that Sarah had found. Her hair had grown back completely, falling in soft curls around her shoulders. They were gone. The physical signs of her illness were fading, though the psychological and spiritual impact would remain forever. When the news crew asked Emma how she wanted to spend her first day as a cancer survivor, she didn't hesitate. "I want to help the other kids," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I want them to know that Duke and I will be here for them, that they're not alone, that they can survive too." The reporter, a seasoned journalist named Mills, felt tears streaming down her face. She'd covered hundreds of stories in her career, but nothing had moved her the way Emma's words did. "Emma, would you be willing to tell our viewers about Duke, about how he helped you?" Emma took's hand and walked her over to where Duke stood. She wrapped her arms around the dog's neck and began to speak. She talked about her fear, about the darkness of chemotherapy, about the moment she first met Duke. She talked about how a dog could understand suffering in a way that transcended words. She talked about her friends in the hospital and how they were all warriors together. The segment that aired that evening went viral. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed over 2 million times. The hashtag Duke and Emma began trending on social media. The hospital received hundreds of emails and phone calls from people all over the country who wanted to know more about the program, who wanted to donate to support animal therapy in pediatric hospitals, who wanted to bring their own dogs to their local medical centers. Officer was interviewed by CNN. He talked about Duke's history as a rescue dog, about the mysterious connection that had formed between the dog and Emma, and about the wider healing that had rippled through the oncology ward. The story of a small child and a police dog inspiring hope in dozens of young cancer fighters captured the public imagination in a way that few stories do. Within 2 weeks, the hospital received enough donations to officially launch the Duke's Warriors program, a comprehensive animal therapy initiative focused specifically on pediatric cancer patients. The program was established as a permanent fixture of the hospital's treatment protocol. Other K-9 units from the police department volunteered to participate. A trainer was hired to work with the dogs and ensure they were properly prepared for the emotional demands of working with seriously ill children. Emma was asked to serve as the program's official ambassador. At just 4 years old, she became a spokesperson for animal therapy in pediatric medicine. She appeared at fundraisers. She was interviewed by magazines. She even received a commendation from the mayor of Portland recognizing her extraordinary courage and her impact on her community. But what mattered most to Emma wasn't the recognition or the media attention. What mattered was seeing other children smile. It was watching Tyler, the angry 6-year-old who had refused to participate in anything, begin to laugh during Duke's visits. It was seeing a 12-year-old girl named Maya, who had sunk into deep depression, start to open up about her feelings to the dog. It was knowing that because she had survived, because she had decided to transform her pain into purpose, other children were finding hope. On the day Emma finished her final follow-up appointment with Dr. Reeves, the entire oncology team lined the hallway to say goodbye. They clapped and cheered as Emma walked through, Duke at her side and her parents flanking her. Emma stopped in front of Dr. Reeves and hugged the doctor tightly. "Thank you for saving my life," Emma said. Dr. Reeves knelt down and looked Emma in the eyes. "You saved your own life, sweetheart, you and Duke. You found the courage inside yourself to keep fighting. I just provided the medicine, but the real healing came from within you." That evening, the Mitchell family sat in their backyard, their normal backyard in their normal house, in their normal life that had transformed into something extraordinary. Emma played with Duke, throwing a ball for the dog to retrieve. She laughed freely, without pain, without fear. Her parents watched with gratitude so profound it was almost unbearable. "We did it," Emma said to Duke, scratching behind his ears. "We really did it. We survived, and now we're helping other kids survive too." Duke's tail wagged as if he understood every word. And perhaps he did. Perhaps animals possess a wisdom about survival and healing and hope that humans spend lifetimes trying to understand. 1 year after her diagnosis, Emma Mitchell stood on a stage at a pediatric cancer fundraiser and looked out at an audience of hundreds. She was 5 years old now, healthy and strong, with her curls shining under the stage lights. Duke sat beside her, calm and present as always. "My name is Emma," she began, "and I'm a cancer survivor, but I'm not just a survivor, I'm a warrior. And I want every kid fighting cancer to know that they're warriors too. And if you have a dog or if you can get a dog, they will help you be brave." The audience erupted in applause. Sarah and David stood in the front row, tears of joy and gratitude flowing freely. They had gone from the darkest place imaginable to witnessing their daughter inspire thousands of people. The victory lap wasn't just about Emma's remission. It was about the transformation of an entire community's understanding of healing, of the power of connection, and of the unbreakable bond between a courageous little girl and her four-legged guardian angel. 3 years after that first miraculous meeting at Riverside Park, a summer morning dawned bright and beautiful over Portland, Oregon. Emma Mitchell, now 7 years old with shoulder-length hair and a smile that could light up a room, raced through the park toward the police K-9 station where Officer and Duke waited for her. Duke's tail began wagging the moment he saw her, the bond between them undiminished by time or circumstance. Emma had been cancer-free for 3 years. The constant fear of relapse that had haunted Sarah's dreams in those early months had gradually faded into something more manageable. Emma's oncologist, Dr. Reeves, had declared her officially cured 6 months ago. The 5-year mark, the threshold that meant statistical remission, was within sight. But for Emma, the absence of cancer cells was no longer the most important measure of her life. Purpose had become more important than survival. The Duke's Warriors program had expanded far beyond anyone's initial expectations. What had started as one police dog visiting one child in one hospital oncology ward had become a comprehensive, nationally recognized animal therapy initiative. 12 K-9 units now rotated through Children's Hospital. The program had been replicated in 17 other pediatric hospitals across the Pacific Northwest. Had been featured in national publications as a pioneer in animal-assisted therapy for cancer patients. He'd been offered a promotion to desk duties at the police department, but he declined without hesitation. His work with Duke and the children was his true calling. "Emma," called out, and the little girl flew into his arms for a hug. Duke pressed against her legs, his massive body a living extension of love and protection. This was their ritual now. Twice a week, Emma and her parents would come to the hospital to work with newly diagnosed children. Emma had become an official peer mentor in the Duke's Warriors program, working alongside trained counselors to help newly diagnosed children and their families navigate the early days of treatment. "How many new kids today?" Emma asked excitedly. 3, said, "and I think Duke is especially eager to meet them. He's been restless all morning, as if he knew you were coming." They walked together toward the recreation room where the morning's group therapy session would take place. Over the past 3 years, Emma had become something of a legend in the Portland pediatric medical community. Parents would ask specifically to have their children participate in sessions when Emma was scheduled to attend. Other hospitals had requested her presence to help launch their own animal therapy programs. At 7 years old, Emma had found her life's mission, helping other children believe they could survive, could thrive, could transform their suffering into something meaningful. Inside the recreation room, 3 children ranging in age from 5 to 9 sat nervously with their parents. Emma recognized the look in their eyes, the look she'd worn 3 years ago. Fear, uncertainty, the feeling of standing at the precipice of something unimaginable. She walked directly to the youngest child, a 5-year-old girl named Sophie with wispy brown hair and frightened eyes. "Hi, Sophie," Emma said, sitting down beside her. "My name is Emma and I had cancer too. I'm here because I survived, and I want you to know that you can survive too. This is Duke. He's my best friend. He's helped me be brave, and he can help you be brave too." Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she reached out a tentative hand toward Duke. The moment her fingers touched the dog's fur, something shifted in her small face. It was the same inexplicable magic that had happened with Emma 3 years earlier, a child and a dog recognizing in each other something that transcended the ordinary. Sarah watched her daughter from across the room, marveling at the confident young advocate Emma had become. Her daughter hadn't just survived cancer, she had transformed it into a legacy of healing. Sarah had gone back to work part-time, and David had also returned to his job, but their lives would never be truly normal again. They'd been to the edge of losing their child and had been given a second chance. That knowledge shaped everything they did, every decision they made. The morning session continued with Emma facilitating conversations between the children and Duke. She talked about her own experience with honesty and age-appropriate candidness. She answered questions. She sat with discomfort. She was wise beyond her years in ways that made trained professionals stop and listen. When the session ended, one of the parents, a father who had been silent throughout, approached Emma. His eyes were red from crying. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "My daughter, she just asked if I could bring her to every session Duke visits. She hasn't asked for anything since her diagnosis. She's been so afraid, but watching you with her, seeing that you survived, it gave her hope." Emma took his hand with the maturity of someone who had lived through far more than most children ever would. "She's going to be okay," Emma said with absolute conviction. "She's going to survive, and Duke and I will be here with her the whole time." After the session, Emma, Sarah, and David sat in the hospital cafeteria. They came here every week now, and it had become their ritual. Would share updates about other children in the program. Emma would talk about how each child was progressing. Sarah and David would listen, still marveling at how their daughter's pain had been transmuted into such profound purpose. "I have something to tell you," said, pulling out a letter. "The National Association of Police K-9 units wants to feature the Duke's Warriors program in their national training curriculum. They're saying that what we've created here is revolutionary, that it's changing how we think about the therapeutic potential of police dogs." Emma bounced in her chair with excitement. "Does that mean more kids will have access to Duke programs?" "It means thousands of kids," said, and Emma's eyes grew wide with wonder. That evening, the Mitchell family returned home to their house in the suburbs. It was a normal house on a normal street, but it held extraordinary memories. Emma played in the backyard with Duke, who had become so much a part of their family that the police department had approved him spending evenings and weekends with them. The dog seemed to prefer it this way, professional work days helping children in crisis, peaceful evenings with his beloved Emma. Sarah sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, watching her daughter and the dog play. She thought back to that terrible day 3 years ago when Dr. Reeves had delivered Emma's diagnosis. She thought about the despair, the fear, the feeling that their world had ended. And then she thought about the moment at Riverside Park, that inexplicable moment when a 3-year-old and a dog had recognized something in each other. David joined her on the porch, settling into the chair beside hers. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Emma and Duke. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" David asked quietly. "Every day," Sarah admitted. "But I'm not thinking about the cancer anymore. I'm thinking about the miracle. I'm thinking about how our daughter found purpose in her pain. I'm thinking about all the other children who are finding hope because of what happened between Emma and Duke." 3 years after that first meeting, the impact continued to ripple outward. The Duke's Warriors program had helped over 200 children. Remission rates at Children's Hospital had improved. But more importantly, children and families had learned that illness didn't have to be the end of their story. It could be a beginning of purpose, of connection, of discovering inner strength they didn't know they possessed. Emma approached her parents on the porch, Duke following close behind. She was holding her journal. She'd started keeping a diary of her experiences with the program. "Guess what?" she announced. "I want to be a doctor when I grow up, a doctor who works with animals to help sick kids." Sarah pulled her daughter close, tears of joy streaming down her face. Her daughter, her brave, beautiful daughter who had walked through fire, was not just surviving. She was thriving. She was inspiring. She was forever changed by her battle with cancer, but not broken by it. Stronger, wiser, more compassionate, more human in the deepest sense of the word. Sometimes, she thought, the most profound gifts come not from ease and comfort, but from courage in the face of impossible odds. Sometimes a child's determination and a dog's unconditional love can change not just one family's story, but thousands of stories. Sometimes, when darkness seems absolute, a connection between two souls, separated by species but united by understanding, can illuminate the entire world with hope. Forever changed. Yes, that was exactly what they were, all of them.